Good morning, everyone. This is Denise Ketty. We'll be starting in just a minute. We want to make sure everybody has a chance to sign in and download the presentation. If you didn't get it in the email this morning, Linda sent out the presentation in the email. Also, there's a link in the webinar chat for the new form I-9 if you want to follow along. So we're just going to wait another second or two before we start.
And Denise, can you drop those in again in a minute, just because I don't know the people that come later can see it or not?
I'll do it actually at the end after I introduce you all guys. Okay. All right, let's get started. Good morning, everyone, again. Thanks for joining the Ethos Human Capital Solutions webinar today. This is our second webinar in the last few months on Form I-9s. Today's webinar is entitled The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly of the New Form I-9. My name is Denise Ketty, and I am your moderator for this session. A couple of quick housekeeping notes. The webinar will run about 55 to 60 minutes. And Linda, I don't know if you changed your thing. It didn't forward on my screen.
Thanks for the reminder.
There you go. So the webinar will run about 55 to 60 minutes. We'll save some time at the end for some Q&A like we always do. Don't worry if you need to leave early. The webinar will be posted on the Ethos YouTube channel. You can always find the previous webinar also that I mentioned earlier, that was Mastering the Form I-9, Navigating Changes and Preparing for the Deadlines, on the Ethos YouTube channel. It's already posted. That was from about a month or two ago. We have two handouts today. The first is the presentation slides. As I mentioned, if you were right on, you can download the slides. I will drop the links in the webinar chat in just a moment. And also you can download the new Form I-9 with the instructions and everything. And again, I'll drop that in the chat in a minute. If you have any questions during the presentation, please post them in the Q&A area on the dashboard at any time. If you like your question directed to a specific person, please make sure you include that in your note. Just a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded and all accompanying materials are protected by copyright. The presentation today is intended for information purposes only and should not be relied on for reaching a conclusion in any area of law. The information offered today during the webinar is as of today, September 7th, 2023. As always, we recommend that you consult your own legal counsel to address specific situations to ensure you have the most current information on legal matters. Our legal expert today is not feeling good, so he is not here. So we're going to jump right into introducing Linda Duffy. Linda Duffy is the founder and president of Ethos Human Capital Solutions, and Linda is known as the people problem solver. Linda and her team are known for building the magic of human connection with their consulting, recruiting, training, and organizational development programs. Linda and her team works with your company by developing strategies for business leaders to get the right systems, people, and culture in place within your organization so that you as a business owner can focus on running your business and achieving your goals. Her clients range from high-tech businesses to manufacturing firms to nonprofit organizations, and she is extremely well-versed in the concerns of founder, CEO-led businesses. Linda, would you like to introduce Nicole today?
I would. Thank you so much, Denise, for being here as always. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Unfortunately, as Denise mentioned, Curtis has taken ill, so Nicole and I are going to handle this today, but I am confident that she is going to do a great job. For those of you that were on the last webinar, you know that Nicole is our lead person when it comes to the HR specialists for Ethos. So she and her team sort of manage the onboarding, and part of that process, of course, is the I-9 forms. So she has years of experience doing this, has headed up audits of Form I-9s, and has been helping all of our clients with the transition from one form to another, and also updating all the forms. Since last you saw her, the exciting news is Nicole recently got engaged, so we wish her the best. She's showing you a ring. So she talks a lot with her left hand now, so don't let that distract you. So anyhow, Nicole, I'm happy to partner with you again, so welcome today.
Thank you, Linda.
And then the other comment I have is, for some reason, I apologize, but I did not submit this for HRCI credits. So I just wanted everybody to know that you can still get credit for attending today. You just won't have the pre-populated number. So when you go to the HRCI website or SPHR or SHRM website or whoever you're going to go to get your credits, you can still put it in with just put the date and the speakers and the topic and everything, and you'll still get credit for attending today. Okay, let's get started with that. So today we're going to be talking about the new Form I-9 that came out recently. Everybody knows that we've been using an expired one since sometime last year, I think October. The new version, you can always tell the newest version because it'll have the expiration date in the upper right-hand corner where I've highlighted it here. So this new form that they just released, in fact, I think it was the day after our last webinar, Nicole,
Right.
my memory serves. Of course, that's why we always date these, right? Because we didn't know they were coming out with the new form yet. And they released it like the day after our last webinar, of course. So this is the new form. This one can be used anytime going forward, and it must be used starting November 1st. Okay, so you can still use the older form if you want to continue using that, but you will need to use this starting November 1st. So from our point of view, we should just start moving everybody over, and that's what we've been doing with our clients, just to get them used to this new form. Also note that there is a Spanish version of this form. However, for whatever reason, in the United States, we cannot use the Spanish form, only Puerto Rico can. So just want to make sure that you're aware of that, because sometimes the Spanish form can come in handy sort of as a translation tool to help people that are primary Spanish speakers, but you cannot use the form to accept their documents. So the new form section 1 looks like this. And again, I recommend that you download, if you haven't already done so, download the whole form so you can see it, because it'll make a little bit more sense. But we've actually gone back in time to where it was when this first came out in 1986. I'd pretty much just started my career. They had a form and it was 1 page, and that's where we are again, back to 1-page form. So now the employee section is on top of that page, and then the employer section is on the bottom, and then we'll be talking to you about some of the other changes made. So this section, section 1, the employee completes at the time of hire or anytime after an offer is made up until day 1, but it has to be done by day 1. So if you extend an offer and you want to send this paperwork out with the offer letter and tell them once it's accepted, they can fill it out, that's fine. You can wait till you get a signed offer and then send them onboarding paperwork, whether you're doing it electronically through a payroll platform, or if you're just going to email documents to them, whatever you want, you can do it after they've accepted the offer and before they start, but it has to be done no later than day 1. A few other things to note on here. Employees are not, employees are no longer required to fill in every single square. One of the things that we would always see before is people would forget to write like not applicable, NA or something in these sections. Well, now you notice it says if any, and the instructions say if you don't have an apartment number, you don't have another name used, you can leave those 2 fields blank. So that's good because it reduces potential fines that you could get on, ticky-tack technical violations just because you drew a line through it or left it blank. So now you don't have to fill that in. The other thing to note is employees are not required to provide an email address or a telephone number if they don't want to. Okay, everything else here is required, including the Social Security number if you participate in E-Verify. If you don't, technically they don't even have to give you a Social Security number on this form. Okay, but just wanted you to know that those 2 fields that I've highlighted in green, those are optional fields, but normally all employees fill it in, and I think it's a good practice so you have their personal contact information as well. Nicole, you want to talk about another new change?
Sure. So another major change from section 1 has to do with the preparer translator section or certification section of the form. So if you recall, on the older version of the form, there was a little bottom portion where it would allow someone to put in their information if they helped the new hire either prepare the form or translate the form for them. So that is now removed completely from section 1, but is now considered a supplement. So the supplement A is dedicated for this purpose entirely. And on the new form, they've actually provided multiple sections if you had multiple preparer translators help you or help the new hire. So for this example, we just kind of screenshot one part of it. However, there's multiple areas that takes up one page to put in as much information as applicable for that new hire. So for this, with this change, there's no longer a box or anything that you would need to indicate to show that a preparer or translator did help with the new hire. So instead, there's going to be a line item at the top, as you can see for this example, for putting in the new hire's last name, first name, middle initial, and then a whole section for the person to put in their own information and sign and date. So for preparers, just as a reminder, that can be anyone, someone who prepared the form for the person or under section 1 or did a little bit more kind of help in guiding through for the form. And for a translator, this can be anyone who, speaks a different language and just needed the form translated for purposes of completing section 1. As Linda mentioned, there is a Puerto Rico or a Spanish version that Puerto Rico can only use. That is a Spanish version of the form. You are more than welcome to use it if you have a Spanish speaking new hire or employee that needs kind of a little bit more guidance. You can use that as a reference and as a guide. However, you can't use it, but that would be an example of someone who translated the form for the new hire.
All right, great. And what about section 2?
So section 2 also went through a little bit of a makeover. So it's now right below section 1, all on the same page. And for this portion of the form, the rules haven't changed in a sense of it still needs to be completed within 3 business days of the new hire starting. But as you can see at the top, there's also not a line item to put the person's last name, first name, middle initial, and citizenship status as the older version does, because it's now all on the same page. So I'm not sure if they just removed it because of redundancy. It's all on the same page. It's there. You don't need to rewrite it for a whole new form. So that's removed. But in terms of making sure the document information is captured correctly based off if someone presents a list A document, there's that column for that, or a list B and C combination document, there's still the same applicable fields that need to be completed. So with this, as a reminder, this is to be completed only by the employer after the new hire presents these documents for the person to fill in for the form. And then oh, you want to take a step
Nope.
back really quick,
Yep.
Linda?
Sorry about that.
So it's okay. And then one last just reminder for a newer update on the form, it's highlighted towards the bottom of the example, but there will be now a space, which we will talk to reference a little bit later, but there is an additional line where you can check a box if an alternative procedure was used at that time when you examine the documents, which will be referenced to if you virtually examine the documents based off the E-Verify registration, which we'll get to again later. But that's a brand new line that they added to the form. And so it's going to be important to note whether or not this applies to you.
All right, great. The list of documents that's now page 2 of the new document did not substantially change. Everything on list A and list B, I believe, are the same. List C, they combine a couple of things having to do with certification of births, meaning birth certificates abroad, and one issued by the Department of State. Those are both now combined in line item 2. So it has 7 options on here instead of 8, but essentially the list didn't change. They just sort of moved some things around. They also added the bottom here under number 7, when they talk about the authorization documents, you can see examples, and they reference this 270M-274. It's called the Employer's Handbook. We have it on another slide, but we highly, highly, highly recommend that you download that Employer Handbook because it gives you instructions, it gives you examples, it gives you pictures of different documents. And so that really is helpful as you're trying to go through and figure out how to complete this form. Also, what did change on the acceptable documents is at the bottom of that page, now they actually call out acceptable receipts. And so they talk about that as well, because as we know, sometimes an employee will show up and they'll say, oh, I lost my driver's license. I don't have anything else that has a picture on it, or I can't find something, but they can go get a receipt for it. For the most part, but again, go through the 274 handbook and find out for yourself on whatever the receipt is. But for the most part, employees have about 90 days after they present a receipt to actually bring in the new document that they obtain. So if somebody applied, for example, for a driver's license, they need to bring you the new one within 90 days, and then you're going to have to update this form. So you always want to make sure that you figure out a way to notate a document like this if their authorization is going to expire, their work authorization is, or if they have a receipt and they're going to need to bring you the original document. Nicole, you want to talk about this part?
Sure. So we just wanted to include a couple of examples of Section 2 since there can be different combinations of documents that can be used for completing this portion of the form. So for this example, we decided to use a permanent resident card, which is most commonly used, but it's also the most that is incorrectly put in. So for permanent resident cards, there's actually information on the back as well as on the front as well as the back of the form of the card that you would need to have. So for this example, the document title is just straight permanent resident card. It is issued by the USCIS. For the document number, it's actually a 13-digit number. It's 3 letters, 10 digits that can be found on the back of the card. It's usually on the first line, on the top, near the top right-hand side of it. But the M74 handbook that Linda mentions actually has a great example of a permanent resident card that can be referenced. But it's just important to know that the document number is not that number that you see right on front of the card. It's towards the back of the card that you have to reference and put in for this type of document.
Right. It's just a lot of people think it's the same number the employee puts in
Mhm.
Section 1, but it's a different number.
And then for this example, we also wanted to use a list B and C combination. So this is the most common that we've seen, or from what I've seen for all the I-9s that we help process. But for a driver's license, it counts as your identity document. So a driver's license, the California DMV, document number and the expiration date. And then for your social security card, it's a list C item, shows your employment authorization to work. And then you can put in whichever corresponding issuing authority releases your social security card.
Yeah, and the reason we use these examples here too is because before, again, like I said about Section 1, you couldn't leave anything blank. So we'd be writing in NA for the expiration date on the list C item because there isn't one right on a social security card. Now you can leave it blank. The other reason we did this and we chose the Department of Health and Human Services, like if you look at my social security card, that's who was in power, so to speak, when that was issued, right? More recently, it's been the Social Security Administration, but when you hire an older employee, I don't know when they changed over, that changed. And so you always have to look at the red circle on the front of a Social Security card and don't assume that it was issued by Social Security Administration, because that can get you fined later if they find out that it was the incorrect issuing authority.
And one more comment on
Yeah.
that for the Social Security card, Linda. So I've seen an array of Social Security cards as well. So some are very, very old where it's almost falling apart. So sometimes you can also find the issuing authority on the back of that card if you can't see that seal stamped.
Great tip. As Nicole mentioned, there was this new box that was on the front of the page, right? So now in Section 2, this is a box that can be used for different notations. In fact, one of the problems that we see when we audit I-9 forms is that people have all sorts of just random writings on it. They'll write like the day they issued, the day they submitted this, or they checked the person's social, or they did something, right? And so they'll just write it wherever, they'll highlight things. You can't have any, whatever the word is, I can't even say the word, but you can't have any extra writing on the form. So this is the note section where you should actually put the notes in there. So for example, when someone brings in a replacement document, or if you want to notate, oh, I submitted it to E-Verify today, or whatever it is, that's where you're going to submit it. It's also where you're going to be documenting, hopefully you've already done this, but documenting that you've now physically inspected somebody's documents that you may have remotely verified once upon a time when they started with you during COVID. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but just remember that that's another way you can use this box. It's also great if you're trying to track when you can destroy a document, and we'll talk about that retention policy. But if you want, it's a good practice to make a note of the termination date in that box. So that's an easy way to go back, or even a destruction date on that box. This is you, Nicole.
Yes. So for for the employer certification, so this is the bottom of section 2, and this also went through a little bit of a revamp. So as you can see from this example that we screenshot, the highlighted fields are what really changed with the certification and attestation portion of it. So the first date of employment still needs to be recorded in the correct nomenclature with month, day, year, year. Um, However, it's kind of moved right next to certification statement on that first line. So we just wanted to bring it to light in case, it's a very easy portion to get missed, but this is kind of now in a new little location for this portion of the form. Another part that did change was the block next to the signature, which is a line for the person who is certifying the documents to put in their last name, first name, and title, or if they were the authorized representative, to put that in there. So all of that is well in one block now. It's not separated as it was on the previous form. So just to make sure that you put all of that information within that same block in the right order.
All right, thanks for that. So this was a change that we talked about in our last webinar, where Department of Homeland Security announced that you can no longer remotely inspect documents. So we did the whole webinar on what to do now about going back and doing the physical inspection. As I mentioned a second ago, if you missed that webinar, because that was required to be done by August 30th, if you missed that webinar, this is a link. You can go out to our YouTube channel and take a look at that. Or if you go to youtube.com/ethoshcs, you'll see all of our prior webinars there. So you'll find it there as well. So you just want to make sure that if you did hire employees during COVID and you remotely inspected their documents, that you do have the requirement, even if you're going to stay remote, even if they're not ever going to come to the office, we no longer have that option. Now, there is one exception to that, because they said if you want to use E-Verify, you can remotely inspect documents. So that is something else that we can talk about. But just keep in mind that we just don't have that option anymore for the most part, right? Unless you want to go through the E-Verify. So Nicole, let's go through a couple of different options that they can use, right? Starting with this. I mean, obviously you can bring the employee to you, right? Fly the employee to your headquarters, or you can designate an authorized representative. You want to talk a little bit about that, Nicole?
Sure. Well, a authorized representative can also be known as a designated agent. Those are kind of interchangeable terms, but it's recognized on a lot of the I-9 documentation as an authorized representative. This person can be a representative that really can be anyone. So as we mentioned, or as we listed here, it could be a neighbor, spouse, relative. The form is very flexible in terms of who this can really be, but this person can assist with the completion of the form, that process, in order to complete the physical verification of the documents presented by the new hire. For this, notaries can also kind of fall into this category. However, it is important to note that not all states allow for a notary to complete the form with their stamp or seal that typically they use. So it's very important to just make sure you recognize that, for example, California and Texas actually do not allow notaries to complete the form for Section 2. But aside from that, it really can be anyone. And we just recommend that it's someone over the age of 18 that is, you know, that understands what the form, what the purpose of the form is. So when choosing an authorized representative, it's just important to keep in mind that they're signing a legal document to help the person's employment.
And it's also important to remember that you're responsible for any mistakes made. So one of the things that you might want to consider doing is having the employee send you the documentation, completing the document, and then sending it back to the employee with some instructions on what the authorized representative needs to do in order to certify that form. So just another tip, because you're going to be responsible if they put the document in the wrong field and things like that, and you're going to have a hard time changing that later if somebody else filled out the form. And then for small employers, the other thing that we found was the options for remote employee document inspection. There are some third-party services that have popped up, Equifax being one of them. So we looked, and assuming this hasn't changed in the last couple of months, for small employers under 100, for example, it's $72 a month, just the ticket to play, right? Which is, a little under 900 a year, and then 95 for each new hire. So depending on how many you're going to do, if you are really scattered all over the country, then that might make sense. I don't know how many offices there are, but you can go to this webpage and it will tell you more about their service. Now, here's the good news. Like I mentioned before, they did carve out one exception, and that was if you're using E-Verify, then you are allowed to remotely inspect documents. So even though, for example, California does not require the use of E-Verify, except for some government contractors, you could voluntarily enroll in the program if you wanted to, and then that would allow you the ability to remotely inspect documents. The way that process would work is that you would have the employee essentially take copies and send to you, scan, email, whatever, pictures, send to you ahead of time. You would have, like a Zoom meeting or something, and you would, have them have the originals with them so that you can verify, by holding it up that yes, that's them. And then that is where in that box that Nicole described before, that additional information checkbox, you would check there to say an alternative procedure was used. You always want to retain a copy of the documentation front and back and make sure they're sending that to you ahead of time. But if you do that and you submit the employees through E-Verify, that's going to eliminate a lot of the, confusion and cost associated with trying to remotely verify their information. Nicole, I think you've enrolled some of our clients before in E-Verify. How difficult was it?
It's a very simple process, actually. So it's just a matter of having the correct information for your company, for your organization, and having that set up so you could just follow the prompts. And for this exact purpose, for I-9 alternative verifications, the E-Verify website has actually done quite a good job of providing you an enrollment checklist that you can follow for what information you need, and laying out the enrollment process, which is having all of the information that some of it's listed here for our bullet point list, but it kind of walks you through the whole process. But it's for those clients that this would really fit them. This is a great alternative, and I think just walks you through the whole process pretty
Right.
smoothly.
And it has the added advantage also that you're not going to hire someone that cannot legally work in the United States, which again can get you fined, can actually, if you do it intentionally, get you jail time. So let's all try to avoid that. Similar to the section for prepare and translator, they now have taken the re-verification and rehire section, what used to be section 3, and they've moved it now and calling it supplement B. So this is the same type of information before, but what they were seeing and what we were seeing upon audit, a lot of times whoever's certifying the form fills that bottom section out too, even though they don't need to. So this has now been separated from the main document. And you're only going to use this page under a few scenarios. One is if somebody had an like a employment authorization document, for example, that expired, then you would have to re-verify them. If somebody gets rehired within 3 years, a lot of people don't know this. You don't have to fill out a new form. You can just update using supplement B. You can just update the form with their new documentation. And then, of course, like Nicole will be doing, maybe, I don't know, but if she changes her name when she gets married, then we would be updating using supplement B as well. So those are the reasons that you would use this document. So now it's just a separate document. It's, when you download it, it all comes attached with all of the supplements, but just wanted you to know it's no longer part of the document. All right, so that's the changes on the new document. Nicole, let's talk about sort of how to make some corrections, because as people go through and they start, hopefully auditing their documents or going back and doing the physical inspection, if you haven't completed that task yet, you might notice some mistakes, and we get these questions a lot. So you want to talk about some of the common mistakes that we see?
Yes. So here are just a few that we have listed that we've seen time and time again. And they range from just the required timing in which the form needs to each section needs to be completed, where, for example, section 1, as Linda mentioned, has to be completed before or by the person's first date of hire. And section 2 would need to be completed within the first 3 days of the person starting within their hire date. So just making sure that you keep to those timelines to stay compliant with the form. Other mistakes that we've seen kind of range from just for documentation purposes, just taking too many or too less of documents. And I've come across a couple that the person didn't even know that their driver's license expired, which is, you'd be surprised, but sometimes I have to push it back. So just making sure that you do not accept any expired documents. And then also to just a lot of the way that the information is written on the form. So an example here we listed is the wrong date format. The form is just very picky still on how the date needs to be entered, whichever date. So if it's date of birth or the date that document's been signed, just keeping at that nomenclature of the month, day, year format. But a lot of these are kind of just case by case basis, but it's always good to know if you ever have questions, you can always reach out to me and my team and we can point you in the right direction of how things need to be properly entered. And then a lot of the corrections that need to be made. So now you identified what needs to be corrected. Now it's a matter of how to go about in making those corrections. So for section 1, it's important to know that employers cannot make that change or correction for the form. It has to be the new hire because they're the ones that completed that section. So whenever you have something that they need to correct, you could just go ahead and simply ask them. If it's something that needs to be completely changed or rewritten, we suggest to follow the format that the I-9 guidelines have posted, where it's to draw a line item or draw a line through that item and then putting the information that's correct, whether above or just somewhere where it's legible, because I know that little space can be kind of crimped. So just putting it where it can be best read, and then initialing and putting in the date in which the correction was made. Now, if there are fields that needed to be completed but were not, and the person can just go ahead and put in the information, you don't necessarily need to draw a line because there's nothing to draw a line through, but you would still need to make sure that you initial and date to show that that's the information that was added after reviewing it as an audit. And then the same procedure kind of follows with section 2. So for section 2, the employer can make those corrections because they're the ones that completed it. So again, if you see information that needs to be rewritten, draw a line, put in the right information, and then you can initial and date. Now, some section 2s have a lot of mistakes. So this has applied to me a couple times where if it's just too many, you are flexible in order to use another section 2 of the page. So you would just attach it to the original. Do not throw anything away, by no means. You still want to keep the original, but if it's too messy or there's too many corrections, you can always just use a new page.
Yeah, and another thing that we haven't mentioned yet, I mean, we've seen this mistake also, is because a new form has been issued, does not allow you or require you to go back and have all of your current employees fill out a new I-9 form. So this is just a form that you're going to use going forward. You cannot go back to your existing employees and say, hey, new form I-9, I need you to fill this out for me. And we've seen that happen before, so please don't do that, because that's actually a violation to go back and have them complete new I-9 forms. So you can use a fresh piece of paper, basically, as Nicole is saying, to make corrections if there are too many mistakes or it gets too many lines on or something like that. But you would just attach it to the original form and go from there.
Then just another couple last minute things to keep in mind when making the corrections. So for the form, do not use whiteout or any other thing to, like whiteout tape or anything to hide the correction. That's not allowed on the form. And then, like I mentioned earlier, do not throw out the original form that contains the mistakes. Make sure to keep all of the original documents with any new forms that you had to complete for purposes of making those corrections. And then we also have just a website here listed from ICE in terms of if you wanted to kind of have a little bit more guidance on conducting your internal audit, you can, and we can also help with that as well.
Great. Every once in a while, this happens. It doesn't happen very frequently, but I have had it happen on a few occasions where an employee comes in and confesses essentially that the documents they originally gave you were false. And so if that does happen, what you would do is just complete a new form I-9 using the most recent form. You still use the same hire date, the original hire date, and then keep the new form and attach it to the old form, and then attach a memo explaining why the change was made or why the new form was made. And it could involve a name change. It could involve a whole bunch of things. So just stay open to that and make sure if they come forward that you're getting a new form I-9 completed for them with the correct information. If they have a new social security number, make sure you let your payroll company know so the tax doesn't get reported on that as well. In terms of storing Form I-9s, just make sure you're storing them away from the employee's file. We recommend a 3-ring binder, unless you're storing them electronically, of course, which would probably be even better. If you're having them manually complete the form and it's not going through like a payroll process or an electronic onboarding process, then you can, of course, scan them after the fact. You can even destroy the original paper copy if you want to. You just want to make sure that you're not leaving them in the employee file in case, ICE walks in and they want to see all of your I-9s. You don't want to give them access to all of your employee information. And if DOL or, EDD or somebody walks in and they want to see employee folders, you don't want them viewing your I-9 forms, right? Because it's just a phone call away to call a sister agency and say, hey, go in and check, them out because I saw mistakes. And yes, I am a conspiracy theorist when it comes to that. So try to avoid those situations. And then also just remember that when somebody leaves the company, you want to pull those I-9 forms out of the 3-ring binder or separate them some way, and then create a way of flagging them so you know when you can destroy those, because the forms are very detailed. They're very picky about them. As soon as you can destroy the form, I recommend you do so, because it's one less opportunity for them to find you if they come in. So here's the documentation, the document retention policy is that you have to keep it the greater of 3 years total from the date of hire or 1 year after termination. So here's our example. Suppose an employee was hired in September of 2020 and they left in March of 2021. 3 years from the hire date would be 9/15/23. 1 year beyond employment would be 3/30/22. So you look at those two dates and you say, which is the longer of those two dates? Oh, September 15th, 2023 is the furthest date out. So you would keep that document for that period of time. If they've worked with you for more than 3 years, and essentially it's 1 year beyond employment at that point. Okay, so that's pretty easy. But sometimes people have trouble with that. So just let us know if you need another example of that. This is usually what Curtis talks about, so I'll just throw up the slide and just remind you that there are a lot of penalties for violations. Some are what they call technical violations. I call them ticky-tack. It's, things like not writing the date in the right nomenclature, things like that. There are other more substantive violations. If they think that you are knowingly hiring or retaining undocumented workers, the fines are pretty hefty, and there can be actual jail time associated with this. So you want to make sure that you're doing the right thing here. We mentioned this document before. It's our go-to. And they update it all the time, and it has been updated for the new form. So this is called Handbook for Employers, and you can also just Google it by M-274, and you'll find it, and you can download it and access it online. So again, it gives you examples. It gives you pictures. It tells you all of those weird things. Somebody came with some weird visa and, how to handle it, or it's a child under 18, or what to do, right? And so this is super helpful. So I've got one more slide to talk about. So I just want to remind everybody, if you do have questions, I see that some have already been posted in there, but we'll have a few minutes to answer them. So take that time now to drop that in while I tell you about an upcoming in-person seminar that we're having. And that is on September 21st. I think that's 2 weeks from today. It's going to be here in Santa Ana. It's going to be live, and I'm going to be speaking. And then Mark Carley, who is with 28 Insurance Agency, and a lot of you know Marla Robinson. She used to do these webinars with me. Curtis is her associate. So the three of us are going to be talking about it. It's titled "They're Coming to Get You," because we see a lot of government agencies out there and insurance brokers out there. Insurance carriers and all sorts of people coming to get you. So we're going to be talking about things you can do to protect your business from different aspects. So if you can join us for that, there is a link at the bottom of this page where you can register. Again, it is in person from 9:45 to 11:45, and then followed by lunch. So hope you can join us, and please register soon. And with that, Denise, I'm going to turn it back over to you for questions.
Great. Okay. Thanks, everybody. So some of the questions really are just having you go back and restate a few things that you talked about. So some of the questions may have come in a little earlier, but Nicole, would you mind giving us the time frame again for when the Form I-9s are due? The question was, do we no longer get the 3-day window from the employees hire date to fill out the form? So can you go over when those forms are due?
Sure. So section 1, the new hire needs to complete section 1 before or by the person's first date of employment. It's section 2 where the employer needs to complete section 2 by within the first 3 days of the person's start. So the way that the USCIS kind of gives us that timeline for more information, which it can be a little bit confusing, but the example that is straight from the website is if someone starts on, let's say, Monday, it shows 3 days as that Thursday within that same week as to when the I-9 section 2 would need to be completed. So when you see it kind of firsthand, it kind of looks like 4, but they mention it's within that 3-day window. So
Yeah.
it's something that, we kind of go back and forth on, but that's straight from the example.
Yeah, it's not my math, but it is exactly the example they give. If someone starts on Monday, you have until Thursday, close of business basically to complete section 2. A lot of people think that there's 3 days to complete the form itself, but not section 1. Section 1 has to be completed on or before their start date, and after an offer has been made and accepted.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I know, Nicole, earlier you spoke about the Spanish version of the form and that the form is supposed to only be used in Puerto Rico, I think you mentioned. But they said, a question was, if we use the Spanish version of the Form I-9 to give employees some guidance, do we need to note that on the form? And if we have to note it on the form, how should we note it on the form?
That's a good question. So, and Linda, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if the Spanish version of the form is only being used by the employee, by the new hire, to be guided and knowing what to put in, they're using that to complete section 1 on their own, just using it as a guide. Now, if the guide is being used, but someone else is preparing that form for them, even with additional help or even translating part of the form, that's where that would need to be notated under supplement A, showing that a preparer or translator did help them. But if the person is just using the form as kind of a reference and as a guide and completing it on their own, I don't think it needs to be notated other than just being used.
I would agree with that. If you want to notate it, then put it in the additional information box and you could just say employee use Puerto Rico form or the Spanish version as a guide, or something like that. But I don't see any reason that you would be required to.
Okay. Another question. If we need to use a new form for corrections, should we use the most current form that's available now, the new form? So if they have
Yes.
to correct the Form I-9.
Yes, and yeah, and a lot of people also didn't know this. I don't know, I learned it a few years ago, but if you were like, let's say you were going to re-verify somebody, you didn't always just include it on section 3 on that exact form. You would need to use the most recent form. So if I hired somebody 2 versions ago, right, and then needed to re-verify it, I wouldn't just put it on that original form. I would use that section 3 of the most recent form to do that re-verification. So now it's a supplement, it's a little bit different, but the answer is you always use the most recent form when you're making that correction. So if you are going to do an audit, now that we have the new form, I would use the new form to make the corrections. And again, you always attach it to the old form and keep all of it together.
Okay, great. You talked a little bit about the fines and everything, and they're so picky on the Form I-9 forms. We have a question. How should document names and agencies be listed? Does it have to be exact? For example, Social Security card, unrestricted. In the past, they used a drop-down menu to see how the names of the documents and agencies should be listed.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I understand exactly what they're
Okay.
asking. So I would say a couple things. One is you are allowed to use what they refer to as sort of, understood abbreviations. I don't know what their word is for understood, but, like easily recognized abbreviations. So for example, if you have a social security card, you could write in for the Social Security Administration, SSA, and they would accept that. Don't make up like your own abbreviations, right? Like go with commonly recognized abbreviations if you want to. If you have questions about how to complete the form, I would refer you back to that employer's handbook, that M274 document, because if you go through, especially if there's anything unusual that you don't see a lot, it'll show you exactly how to complete it. So that's your best reference tool. Don't go crazy on your abbreviations, but commonly accepted abbreviations you can put in. And if you don't know, the the document will always tell you the issuing authority. So like Nicole said on the example of the Social Security card, if you can't see it in the red circle on the front, flip it over, it'll tell you on the back of the document. You should always be, if you're taking copies, in my opinion, you should always be taking copies of the front and the back, because a lot of times information you need, like for the permanent resident card example, is on the back of the document or the card.
Okay, great. This question is made me laugh, but why does Section 2 ask for the authorized rep required last name, first name, and title, even though people's signature is in the opposite format? Is this another sneaky way to get a fine?
Who knows? I mean, Nicole and I were reviewing this and preparing for this, and we both think it's sort of weird that they could put it all in the same box. And they specifically also, if you notice, said last comma, first comma, title, right? So that's the other thing. I don't know why they did that. It's probably a space thing because they're trying to, cram it all into one form again. So I don't know. Nicole, any thoughts on that?
No, exactly. Just it's a little weird for me, but it's how it's laid out now.
And it's going to be something that people forget, like the title, or they put like Linda Duffy, president, or something like that, instead of following the instructions and nomenclature, because they are very picky about that. I also think another thing that people are going to be missing is where you input the new hire date, because it used to be right in the middle of that paragraph, and now it's a little bit to the right in that signature box. And I just have a feeling it's going to be a while until people get used to putting that new hire date there.
Great. So maybe the question is, yes, they might have done that to get more fines. I don't know.
Who knows? Who knows?
If using a notary, to be an authorized agent to verify the documents, is the state the company is registered in, can that be where the notary is, or can it be where the state the employee resides in?
Can you say that again? I'm not sure I followed
Yeah.
the question.
So you're going to notarize the document. So you need to notarize the documents that are used. Do we have to do it in the state that the company is registered in? So like, let's say, New Mexico, but the employee lives in California or something. Which was it?
No, I don't think so. And Nicole, feel free to jump in here. I don't think there's any requirement to do it in the same state. So if the question is really, hey, California doesn't allow notaries, but I don't know, but let's just say Arizona did or something, could we cross state lines to have the form filled out? Yeah, I guess so. I mean, you could. I just think there's easier ways to do it, like using an authorized representative, something like that. Nicole, any thoughts on that
Right.
question?
No, it would just be where the employee resides in. I have an example of a client who has a lot of new hires that are cross country, and so we've asked them to, find a notary to complete the form, but the company resides in California, so they're not going to be flying out to get a notary done there if they're living in some other state. So, and it also too, it kind of in using the notarized method, that's you know using the authorized representative route. So the purpose of the authorized representative is to make kind of that re-verification process simpler and more make it easier for the person to complete that portion of the physical inspection. So it's for me, it's based off where the employee resides.
Okay, perfect. Okay, someone wanted to confirm, although California does not require e-verify, if the new hire is in California, they must submit an I-9 with the applicable documentation.
Oh yeah, every employer in the nation has had the requirements since 1986 to have the Form I-9 completed. So it has nothing to do with E-Verify. The reason we brought up E-Verify, because California doesn't require it, but it gives you the option of the remote verification. So for example, we have one client, and I don't even know, Nicole, for FS, how many states are they in? Like, it's a ton.
It's at least 10 to 15.
Yeah, so they have employees all over the place. And so you have to say, how are we going to remotely verify their documents? Well, the only option now to remotely verify the document is if you participate in the E-Verify program. So you could still do the authorized representative. If the state they're in allows it, you can use a notary. You can go through a third-party service like what Equifax has. There's a lot of other ways to do it. So you don't have to use E-Verify, but regardless, everybody has to have a Form I-9 unless you are a sole proprietor. You don't have to, but if you are an S Corp or a C Corp, the owner has to as well. So everybody has to have a Form I-9 on file.
Okay, great. And they're talking about the handbook, so I think it's the handbook that you referred to. I see if we only need to keep page 1 per the handbook, if that's all that's filled out, is that correct? So if they only have filled out the first page on the Form I-9 form, is that the only thing that they have to keep?
Well, no, you have to have you have to have section 2 completed. So I'm not sure what they're asking. If you're saying you're going through and you're auditing and only page 1 was filled out, that's all you keep, then you need to fill out a page 2 at this point in time and attach it. So going forward, it's all on the same page. So if I'm not sure what the question is, so if that person wants to raise their hand or clarify it or call me later, we can talk it out. If you're talking about page 1 of like documentation, there's no requirement to keep documentation at all. I'm just saying if you are going to keep documentation, then I would keep copies of both the front and the back. It'll save yourself some headaches later if you have to call that employee back in, or you realize on page 2 or now section 2 you forgot something, and you can easily go to your file and go, oh, I want to verify that driver's license, or I forgot to write in the issuing authority or something. You're going to have it right there, and it's easier than having the employee come back in and bring back the exact same documents.
Okay, they just wrote back, the I-9 is only 1 page now, so is that all we need to keep?
Yes, you don't have to keep the addendums if that's what you meant. Thanks for clarifying that. You don't have to keep the addendums or anything else. Just keep page 1, section 1 and 2. and fill that out and put it in the binder or wherever.
Okay. If we implemented scanning all new hire documents, do the I-9 still have to be printed and placed in an I-9 binder, or can we simply create an electronic I-9 binder?
Nicole, you want to take that one?
So the answer would be you could keep an electronic binder in storage as long as, again, it's separated from the employee's file and not mixed in with the rest of their personnel file. So yes, you could keep an electronic version. You don't necessarily need to reprint everything if you have a system that's helping you organize that data for you.
And let's talk about again why this is important. You know, if you think about the information that's contained in I-9 form, it is ripe for a stolen identity, right? You've got the person's address, social security, date of birth, like all of their information, their personal email and phone number, probably, you know, the name, their proper name, like you have the information that someone with devious intentions could use against that employee. So that's one reason you're going to keep it separate. So your managers who might have access to an employee's performance appraisals, let's say, or something like that, doesn't also have access to this. So it's just a privacy issue. And again, my other example is if one agency comes in, you only want to give them the documentation that they need for whatever they're investigating, and you don't want to give them access to other information that could cause them to call a sister agency and say, hey, you know what, you need to really go in. I don't even want to say ethos. We need to go in and see ethos because we noticed when we were going through their employee files, right, that their I-9s were messed up or they were missing I-9s or whatever it is. So just try to avoid that whole situation by keeping them separate, whether it's electronically or, you know, hard copy.
Okay, great. When writing the name of the verifier, does the job title have to be spelled out? For example, human resources specialist, or can we just write the words HR specialist? Everybody's nervous about the fines.
They should be, because I mean, I've just seen it happen too many times. Certain industries are going to get inspected more often than not. And then if you have government contracts, that's going to happen as well, right? If you don't, I mean, I don't really expect, you know, ICE to walk up to my front door and knock on it anytime soon, right? We're just not in that industry, but you have to be really careful. So the answer is they said you can use commonly accepted abbreviations, right? So I would think that HR, for example, would qualify as a commonly understood title, but just in general, be careful about too many abbreviations if it's something that you use but nobody else would know, right? So if you want to write HR representative or HR rep or something like that, I would think that you're okay with that. Make sure it goes in that same, you know, same field now with your last name, comma, first name. But I think you can put that there. Because the other thing that comes up you have to be careful about, and David pointed this out in the question and answer section, is some states, if you look at a driver's license, like we all say driver's license, but if you look at it and you notice my example, I said driver license because that is actually, I think, how California has it on the actual document. And so you want to make sure that you're taking the name of the document as it appears and it's not all the same. So yes, be very particular about the language you're using when you're completing the document.
Okay. Can you use a rubber stamp for the organization's address rather than writing it all out?
I don't know if that's allowed or not. I personally, if you're going to do everything hard copy, I would actually type out everything but that signature. I would put my last name, comma, first name, comma, title. I would put in everything I could with the organization's information so I can just reproduce that. And all I have to do is then sign it.
So, and would that be a wet signature, or can we just type it out?
Wet signature, always a wet signature.
Okay, always a wet signature.
I mean, unless they're going to do it, unless they're like e-signing a document, but if you print it out and stuff, yeah, you can't pre-populate the signature.
Okay. Can we use E-Verify to remotely review ID for only some of the employees in a state and not all in the state if the state does not require E-Verify? For an example, some employees that work remotely far from our corporate office, but others we will have come into the location and fill out the form I-9. So
yeah, I would direct you to the E-Verify site to actually review that and make sure that you're getting the official response, but I'll tell you what I believe is the answer based on my understanding and review. If you're using E-Verify in a state, you need to use it for all employees, not just some. That's what I believe the website says. And I see Nicole shaking her
Correct.
head.
I
Yes,
agree.
yes.
Mhm.
So if you wanted to try to carve out a group of employees, I would be very careful about doing that. And I would actually write a memo to file and keep it like in the front of your I-9 notebook if you're using it that way, or some folder or something where it says, we're only doing this for like remote workers. They said if you're in a state and let's say you have like California, let's just take California. Let's say we're here in Orange County and we're hiring people, somewhere else in the state. You could say, well, for the people that come into the home office, we don't use E-Verify, but the people that are remote, we do. I believe that's acceptable, but I would direct you to the E-Verify site and research that to be sure.
Okay, so we're right at noon. One of the questions that came in, which is going to be too long to answer here, is what triggers an audit? So I think you covered some of it in the last webinar.
It could be
Or-
almost anything.
Okay.
Again, it could be that a different agency comes in and sees something and then, notifies ICE. It could be because you're in a certain industry that's more likely than not. I mean, they keep saying that they're hiring all of these investigators. We, knock on wood, have not had a lot of our clients audited. I don't know if we have had any audited, Nicole, if you can
No.
think of any, in the last 10 years, but I have had clients in the past audited. And when back in the day when I was in-house, we were audited because we had government contracts at one of my prior employers.
Okay. Okay, I think that's it for today because I know we're both, or all three of us actually have another set of meetings to go to. We will put this webinar on the Ethos website, on the Ethos YouTube channel, probably later on this afternoon.
All right, great. And you'll just see when you download the slides, the different services that Ethos does offer. So if we can ever help you with anything, please reach out. And thanks again for attending.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a great day.